I still remember the first time I saw him, not as my mother's new husband, but as a person. It was a strange in-between moment. He stood in the hallway of our new house, shoulders slightly slouched, sleeves rolled up, holding a heavy box labeled kitchen. A drop of sweat traced his temple. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. That's what caught my attention. My mother had remarried after nearly a decade of raising me alone. I had turned 17 just a month before, old enough to question her decisions, too young to voice them without being accused of teenage dramatics. When she introduced him, "This is Peter," I didn't shake his hand. I nodded and went back to my room. But something about his presence settled into the house. Not demanding, not aggressive. Quiet. Observant. He learned where we kept the spices before he knew my favorite cereal. I watched him more than I meant to. The evenings were the worst. The quiet pressed against the windows, heavy with the awkwardness of people trying to pretend they were a family. My mom would flip between topics at dinner, her voice stretching thin. I'd eat quickly and leave, leaving them alone with candlelight and expectations. Peter never said much at first, but I started noticing things. How he always left the porch light on if I went out. How he knocked once before entering any room, even the living room. How he stood between me and the street when we crossed the road, even though he never commented on my short skirts or late hours. One evening, I came home to find him in the garage, fixing something with a quiet determination. I hovered at the door longer than I meant to. "You okay?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah, just thinking." "Thinking can be dangerous," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. I don't know what made me say it. Maybe the chill in the air. Maybe the way the house didn't feel like mine anymore. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. He finally looked at me then. "Regret what?" "Marrying her." He set the towel down and leaned against the workbench. "No," he said, but I didn't realize it came with so many unspoken rules. Rules! He nodded, like never being in the same room with you too long, never asking you about school unless your mom's around, pretending we're not strangers. I stood frozen for a second. Then I stepped inside the garage, shutting the door behind me. The air between us thickened. "Maybe we don't have to pretend," I said. He didn't answer right away. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. "Maybe," he whispered. The next morning, nothing was said. Peter poured his coffee, same as always. My mother rushed around the kitchen, flustered because she was late for work. I leaned against the counter in an old hoodie, watching him over the rim of my mug. He met my eyes once, just once, and looked away. It wasn't awkward. It was something else. Something hanging between us like a held breath. Later that day, I came home to an empty house. Mom was out with friends. Peter's truck was in the driveway, but the house was quiet. I found him in the living room reading. He didn't hear me come in. I stood in the doorway, uncertain. Then I stepped inside, sank onto the opposite end of the couch. "Long day?" he asked, his voice low, casual. I shrugged. "School's boring. People are boring." "You're not like them," he said. No hesitation. "You don't pretend." His eyes didn't leave the book, but his meaning was clear. I leaned back, studying him. The fine lines around his eyes. The veins on his forearms. He was older, yes, but not old. And there was a gravity to him I hadn't noticed before. Like he carried silence the way other people carried opinions. "You watch people too much," I said. "So do you." I smirked. Maybe we're not that different. He turned the page. Maybe that's the problem. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, my mother went to bed early. Said she had a migraine. I stayed up late, the television playing some forgettable movie I didn't care about. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. He stood in the doorway of the living room again, just like in the garage, just watching. "You're still up," he said. "So are you." He didn't move right away, just watched me in the dim glow of the TV. Then, quietly, he crossed the room and sat in the armchair beside the couch. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The room filled with a strange, humming silence. Not empty, not lonely, just alive, He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long day, but the kind that clings to you bone deep. A part of me wanted to ask if he was okay, but I didn't. Instead, I asked, why her? He looked at me, puzzled. My mom. Why did you marry her? He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. She was kind, he said, and she seemed like someone who needed saving. I think I liked the idea of being needed. I chewed on his words. Do you still feel needed? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, not in the way I thought I would. I nodded. That made two of us. We sat there in that low light, the air growing heavier by the minute. I stretched my legs out, barely brushing his ankle with my toes. He didn't move. You're different when she's not around, I said. And you're less guarded. I stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible patterns in the plaster. My heart felt loud. Too loud. I couldn't tell if he was drawn to me, or if I was projecting some wild idea onto this quiet, careful man. But something was happening. That much was undeniable. I don't know what we're doing, I whispered, finally. Peter turned toward me, his voice barely audible. Neither do I. That night, I barely slept. The silence of the house stretched long and tense, like a tightrope. I lay in bed, eyes open, tracing the moonlight as it crept across my ceiling. I kept replaying our conversation in the living room. His voice, that pause before he said, not in the way I thought I would. There was something raw in that moment, something real. It's strange how a single sentence can make you look at someone differently. Or maybe not differently, but honestly, with every filter removed. The next morning, I avoided him. I stayed in my room, claiming a headache when Mom knocked on my door. I could hear her talking to Peter downstairs, her voice bright, full of plans and suggestions for the weekend. I couldn't hear his responses, just the low hum of his voice. Steady, patient. Always patient. But later, after she left for her errands, I found myself walking downstairs. I told myself I was hungry, that I needed coffee, that the day was too beautiful to waste hiding. But really, I needed to see if the quiet between us had changed again. Peter was in the backyard, standing by the fence with a cup of coffee. The sunlight made his shirt glow faintly, his figure softened by the glare. He didn't turn when he heard the sliding door open, but I knew he knew I was there. Morning, I said. He looked over his shoulder. Morning. I stepped outside, the warmth of the day wrapping around me. There was still dew on the grass. The birds were louder than usual. I felt out of place in my own skin. He handed me his coffee without a word. I took a sip. It was strong, too strong, but I didn't complain. I handed it back, our fingers brushing. He didn't pull away immediately. You okay? He asked after a long silence. I nodded. I just didn't sleep much. He exhaled through his nose, quiet but knowing. Me neither. There was a bench beneath the tree, one I used to sit on as a kid. We both drifted toward it without speaking, drawn into the space between the words. We sat close, but not too close. You said something yesterday, I said after a while, staring out at the rustling trees. About not feeling needed the way you thought you would. His hand rested on his knee. Yeah, I feel that too, I admitted. Like I'm supposed to play this part, be her daughter, be a good student, go through all the motions, but sometimes it feels like I'm just standing in the wings. Not really part of the play. Peter was quiet for a moment. You're not the only one who feels that way. I glanced at him, studying the curve of his jaw, the faint crease between his brows. So why stay? Why pretend? His lips parted, then closed again. He looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me. Because sometimes pretending is safer than the truth. The wind picked up, a soft rustling sweeping through the trees. I felt it move across my bare arms, but the chill wasn't what made me shiver. And what if the truth isn't dangerous? I asked, my voice softer now. What if it's just complicated? His jaw tensed. He didn't answer. And then, without warning, he stood. Come on, he said, nodding toward the side of the house. I followed, uncertain. We ended up in the garage. He opened a cabinet and pulled out an old canvas drop cloth, spreading it on the floor like it was a sacred ritual. "Do you still paint?" he asked. I blinked. "What?" "I saw your sketchbook once. In the kitchen drawer, under the bills. You tucked it away, like you didn't want anyone to see it." "I haven't painted in years," I admitted. He pulled out a battered box of acrylics, an old easel, brushes that had seen better days. "You should," he said. I stared at the setup. My fingers twitched. "You went through all this just to—" I trailed off. "To remind you that you're more than what people expect from you." His voice was calm, but there was something intense beneath it, something unspoken, burning slow. I picked up a brush, held it for a second, then set it down. "I don't even know where to start," I whispered. He stepped closer, not too close, but enough that I could feel the heat of him. "Then don't start with the painting," he said. "Start with yourself." I turned, and he was right there. Close. His eyes locked with mine. Stormy, restrained, full of things he would never say out loud. My heart pounded. My skin felt electric. He reached out, only for a second, and brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. And then, just as quickly, he stepped back. "I'll be inside," he murmured. "You've got the space." When he left, the air felt heavier, like it had been filled with something and then emptied too fast. I stared at the easel, the brush, the blank canvas. My hand reached out, trembling just a little, and I picked up the paint. Not because I needed to express anything, but because something inside me had been stirred, and it wasn't going to settle again. I didn't paint that day. I sat in the garage for over an hour, the brush hovering inches above the canvas, my eyes fixed on a space somewhere beyond the room. My thoughts swirled like the muted colors still trapped in their tubes, raw sienna, deep gray, and that impossible shade of blue I could never name. Peter didn't come back to check on me, and that made all the difference. He gave me the space, but the tension lingered, heavier now, almost physical, like a thread had been pulled too far and couldn't retract. That night, dinner was unusually quiet. My mother talked, she always did, but her words drifted around the room without landing anywhere. Peter barely spoke. He nodded, smiled at the right moments, past the salt, and every so often I could feel him watching me when she wasn't looking. Not in a way that made me shrink, in a way that made me feel, aware of my own skin, the breath in my throat, the ache in my chest that hadn't been there before. After dinner, I did the dishes slowly, letting the water run long and hot, pretending the steam could melt the confusion off my bones. My mom kissed Peter's cheek before heading upstairs with a book in hand and a glass of red wine. "I'll be up late," she said, already halfway to the landing. "That novel you got me is impossible to put down." Peter stood in the doorway. "Don't wait up." I pretended not to hear that last part. Or maybe I only wished I had. When the house settled into its quiet, I wandered into the living room and found him there, exactly as I knew I would. The TV was off. No music played. He sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped, the kind of stillness that draws you in without trying. I stood in the doorway. "I didn't paint," I said. "I know." I walked over and sat across from him, close, but not close enough. My knees brushed the edge of the coffee table. His fingers tapped once, nervously, against his leg. "Why does this feel?" I paused, trying to find the right word. "Loaded." "Because it is." That was the first honest thing either of us had said since the moment in the garage. And it hit me like a gust of wind, soft, but strong enough to shift everything out of place. I exhaled slowly. "You don't talk like this with her." He didn't respond. "You don't look at her like that either." Still silence. The seconds stretched out, long and uncertain. Then Peter leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor between us. "I didn't marry your mother because I was in love with her." I stared at him, stunned into stillness. "She's kind, good, but I was lonely. She was too. It made sense. We told ourselves it was enough." My chest tightened. "You deserve more than enough," I said. "So do you." His voice broke a little on that last word. I looked down at my hands. I wasn't supposed to be here, emotionally, physically, whatever line people would say I was about to cross. But that line, it had started blurring long before either of us noticed. I don't want to feel this, I whispered. But you do. He didn't ask it. He knew it, and I hated that he was right. I stood suddenly, pacing to the window. The night outside was still, the street lights casting long shadows across the lawn. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked, sharp and meaningless. I used to feel invisible in this house, I said, like I didn't belong in my own story. I turned to face him, and then you walked in and started seeing me. Peter rose to his feet, slow and deliberate. I didn't mean for that to happen, but it did. We stood there, 5 feet apart, the air between us a living thing. I could feel it wrap around me, heavy and expectant. He looked at me, really looked, and there was no silence left. Only the sound of 2 people standing on a threshold neither of them had asked for. I need to go, I said. He nodded. Okay, but I didn't move. He stepped forward, just 1 step. His hand lifted, hovering near my face, but he didn't touch me. Say stop, he said, voice low, and I will. I looked up into his eyes. I can't, I breathed. He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, the room shifted. The walls, the floor, the air, it all bent around what wasn't being said, what couldn't be said. The kind of closeness that undoes you, not in a flash, but in 100 quiet ways. And then I stepped back, not because I didn't want to be near him, but because I knew the only thing more dangerous than crossing the line was standing at the edge of it and waiting. The days that followed became a quiet war of glances and footsteps. We moved through the house like actors on a stage, performing lines we'd rehearsed our whole lives. I greeted my mother in the mornings, smiled at the right jokes, did the dishes, went to school. Peter took out the trash, helped her zip up her coat, asked if she needed anything from the store. But behind those moments were all the things we weren't saying. The house was never loud, but now the quiet hummed with electricity. Every time I walked into a room and saw him there, something inside me held its breath. Every time our fingers brushed, however lightly, passing a cup, a plate, a folded towel, the air pulled tight around us like a thread wound too far. I started going to bed earlier. At least that's what I told them. Truth was I needed the distance. Or maybe I just needed the darkness to think, to breathe, to unravel everything I had once been so sure of. On Friday night, the weather shifted. A storm rolled in late, soaking the neighborhood in a cold, relentless rain. The kind that made the windows rattle and the gutters hum like old violins. My mom had an overnight work retreat, team building, she said, and packed her suitcase with more enthusiasm than usual. Peter drove her to the train station just after dinner. When he returned, he didn't come inside right away. I saw him through the window, sitting in the truck, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. It was nearly midnight when I heard the soft thud of his boots on the stairs. I'd been awake in bed, the rain whispering against the roof like a lullaby I couldn't follow. I stepped into the hallway, barefoot, heart thudding too loud. He was halfway up the steps when he looked up and stopped. We stared at each other across the dim space. The house creaked around us, old bones settling in the storm. You couldn't sleep either, I said, barely above a whisper. No, he said. His voice was different, rougher, not tired but stretched thin, like something inside him was fraying. I keep thinking about that night, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He didn't pretend not to know which night. I've been trying to forget it, he admitted, but it keeps coming back. I stepped down 1 stair. He stepped up 1. We were eye level now, just a few feet apart. You told me to say stop, I whispered. But I didn't. His breath hitched, just barely. And you didn't move, I added. The light from the hall bathed us in amber. His hair was still damp from the rain. I could see the faint glisten on his neck, the pulse at his collarbone. He reached for the railing like he needed something solid to hold on to. This isn't right, he said, voice rough, broken. I know. Another step between us. Closer. But it's real, I said. A long pause. He stared at me like he was memorizing something he knew he shouldn't. Like he was trying to anchor himself in this one final moment of restraint. You scare me, he said. Why? Because I haven't wanted anything this badly in a long time. There was pain in his voice, and hunger, and something else, grief maybe, for all the rules we were about to leave behind. You make me feel seen, I whispered, and I don't know what to do with that. I should walk away, he said. Then why haven't you? His hand left the railing. The hallway held its breath. I stepped forward. He stepped back. Tell me to stop, he said again, quieter now. I reached up, my fingertips barely brushing the collar of his shirt. Don't stop. We stood there, motionless, suspended in a moment too taut to last. And then, finally, he leaned in. Slowly, cautiously, but with purpose. His lips brushed mine, tentative at first, a question disguised as a kiss. When I didn't pull away, he deepened it, just slightly, just enough. Enough to say this is real. This is happening. My hands found his chest. His arms curled around my waist. The kiss wasn't perfect. It wasn't smooth or poetic or planned. It was trembling and raw and full of all the things we'd held back. It was the kind of kiss that didn't need to go further to mean everything. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. Neither of us spoke. There were no words left for what we'd just done, only the sound of our breathing. And the storm, steady outside. The morning after the kiss, everything felt different, but nothing had changed. We didn't talk about it. We didn't touch again. Not because we didn't want to, but because we knew the silence that followed would be louder than the act itself. I stayed in my room most of the day. Peter moved around the house with quiet purpose, fixing a broken door hinge in the laundry room, organizing tools in the garage. It was the kind of overcompensation that spoke volumes. He needed control. To build, to repair, to hold something in place. Anything but the truth. When I passed him in the hallway later, neither of us spoke. But he paused beside me, just long enough to press a hand gently, barely, against my back as we crossed. It was like being branded, and it was over in a heartbeat. That evening, the front door opened and my mother stepped inside with a gust of wind and the scent of a hotel room still clinging to her coat. She was glowing, relaxed. She dropped her bag on the floor, exhaling like she hadn't breathed in days. Home, she said, smiling. I missed you too. I forced a smile. Welcome back. Peter kissed her cheek, a beat too slow, too mechanical. I caught it. So did she. Something flickered in her eyes. The house filled with her presence, her voice in the kitchen, her shoes in the hallway, her perfume on the staircase. And suddenly, it was like there was no space left to breathe. That night at dinner, the tension snapped taut again. She noticed it. I could feel it in her narrowed glances, the way her questions were too pointed, her smiles too thin. She studied us, not in the way of someone casually listening, but like she was searching for the outline of something she wasn't supposed to see. Everything okay while I was gone? She asked, looking between us. Peter cleared his throat. Of course. Quiet. I nodded. Pretty uneventful. She tilted her head, not smiling. You two seem different. Peter sipped his water. Different how? Her eyes moved to me. I don't know. Just a feeling. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm had been. Even the clink of forks against plates felt suspicious. Later, after she went to bed, I stood in the dark hallway, listening to the muffled creak of the stairs as Peter descended. I knew he wouldn't come to my room. I knew I wouldn't go to him. But I waited there, listening to the night unfold in the quiet hum of everything we had buried. And then I heard it. My mother's door creaked open. Soft footsteps down the hall. I ducked behind the corner near the stairwell, hidden in the shadows. She stood there in her robe, at the top of the steps, staring down toward the living room. She wasn't looking for Peter. She was watching. Her face was unreadable. But her eyes, Sharp, uncertain, calculating, told me everything. She knew something had shifted. Maybe not the whole truth. Maybe not the kiss. But she felt the fracture in the foundation. The next morning, her warmth was replaced by questions she never asked directly. Her touches lingered longer on Peter's arm. Her smiles to me came with pauses too heavy to ignore. And every time she walked out of the room, she left a silence in her place that dared either of us to fill it. We didn't. We couldn't. The kiss had been real. But the walls were watching now. And the quiet between us was no longer ours alone.